Shalom Aleichem. Last week we finished off near the end of chapter 5 in the laws of prayer. I will give a little recap. Chapter 5 discusses the 8 matters that one who prays, we're talking about praying the standing prayer here, the Amidah, or Shmona Esrei, however you want to call it. So there are 8 matters that when one prays this prayer, he should be cautious to do these 8 things, to take care of these 8 matters. But if he was pressed, under duress, or coerced to transgress or to not do one of these 8 matters, or even if he high-handedly didn't do one of them, that his failure to take care of one of these 8 particular things does not prevent him from fulfilling his obligation to pray. He therefore has no need to go back and say the prayer again if he didn't take care of one of these 8 things. And these 8 are standing, facing the temple, the fixing or preparing of one's body for prayer, the fixing one's clothing or adjusting of one's clothing, preparation of the location of prayer, the lowering or leveling out of one's voice, and bending down, and prostration. So we had just finished off the clarification of all of these, all the way up to what is meant by bending down, kari'ah. We pretty much finished that up, but kind of had to cut it short last week. So I'll pick back up with that point. So we're in the Laws of Prayer, chapter 5. I will now post for you a link where you can follow in Hebrew if you want. And there's also English available. This is the Hebrew. I just posted to the chat. Now, if you can find on Chabad's website the English also, you just type in search on their website Mishneh Torah, and you should see English in brackets appear in auto field. Okay, so we left off with the matter of bending down, Kari'ah. So we'll go ahead and begin in the 13th law. All of these acts of bending down, so with regard to all of these acts of bending down within the context of the standing prayer, a person should bend down to the extent that the vertebrae of his backbone protrude, and he makes himself in the form of an arch. We said last week that the Rambam often utilizes letters to describe different forms or shapes of things throughout his work, the Mishneh Torah. And here, if he were to want to describe the regular kind of bending down that most people do today, he would have more likely used the term like a resh, that he would bend down like the letter resh. If you know what the letter resh looks like in Hebrew, it looks very similar to the small English letter R, the lowercase letter R, like that, which is pretty much the most you're going to find most people bowing. Or like a vav, the letter vav, which just has a slight hook, like bending the neck. But he doesn't. He says, in doing so, he makes himself in the form of an arch. There is no Hebrew letter that conveys that idea. Ve'im shaha ma'ak v'tzi'er atmo, and if he bowed a bit and caused himself pain, v'nir'a kechori'a b'chor koho, and it is seen that he's bowing according to his ability, there's no need for concern. He doesn't have to force himself, and he shouldn't force himself, especially if it's causing himself pain. That would be an example where one is being foolishly pious. There's a term for that concept in the Talmudic literature. Alright, so now the 14th law, Hishtahawaya kesav. So what is implied by prostration? The last of the 8 matters mentioned before. After one lifts his head from the 5th bending down of the standing prayer. Note, after he finishes it, after he lifts his head from that final bow of the standing prayer. Yeshev lo. He then sits on the ground. He doesn't sit on a bench or a chair. It says quite explicitly, and unlike what some may have you think, the Rambam didn't write this because they had nothing else to sit upon. If he didn't intend to be specific, he could have just said, and he sits. But one, the Rambam was specific. He didn't just write, and he sits, but he wrote, and he sits on the ground. And two, they did have chairs back then, as well as stools. All of these are referred to in his work, the Mishneh Torah. Tall chairs as we have today, though they had them back then, were less common, but stools were common. So when you lift your head from the fifth bow, then you sit to the ground. And you fall faceward onto the ground. And one then supplicates with all the supplications that he desires. This, as you will see, again mentioned in his order of prayer at the end of the Book of Love. You will see that he again emphasizes, as you see here, that there is no required specific text to be said during this part of prayer which immediately follows the standing prayer. Excuse me. There's no codified text or wording that one must pray at that time. What one must do, however, is say words of supplication according to his desire. So though it is fine to say the customary words that have a little prayer book production line going on right next to us. Sorry for the disturbance. You'll have to take that up with MrBJewish.org. But sounds like a sewing machine. So, though it is fine to take care of this obligation together with saying the customary words of supplication that different communities have taken upon themselves to say, one must be careful while doing that to also include supplications that are reflective of his own desires, because that is the essence of this law, that one say supplications of his desires. Kari'a. The act of bending down, which is mentioned in every place. Remember, the Rambam just got finished explaining to us the 5 places in a standing prayer where one bends down. The Hebrew word there is kari'a. The noun is kari'a. Now here, immediately following that, the Rambam says, simply quoting verbatim what's in the Talmud, that the act of bending down, this word kari'a that he just referred to 5 places in the standing prayer, in every place, al birkayim, is done on the knees. Al means on, birkayim is knees. Can't be any more clear than that. One who wants to try to philosophize away the straightforward meaning here will have to make it consistent with the way that Rambam also describes the act of prostrating, hishtahwaya, and qidah, general bowing, in the same law, where again he also uses the word al. So al here means, in its regular sense of the word, on, and not over, as some have tried to explain. Also, if you look in the original context in the Talmud, where the Rambam is quoting this from, you'll see that this is learned from the examples given by Daniel the prophet and King Solomon, both of whom explicitly are described as being on their knees in prayer. So take it up with anybody else. Don't take it up with me, because I don't think I have any more to see on it. That probably sounds a little bit. Whatever questions you have, ask them. Let's see. Did anybody say anything? Any questions? Status away. Okay. So, the act of bending down in every place is on the knees. Qidah al apayim. The act of qidah, general type of bowing over, is done with the face on the ground. Qidah is in contrast to kari'a, because kari'a, the act of bending down, though it must be on the knees, it does not require that one's face touch the ground. only that one, while on the knees, is bowed over enough that his backbones protrude, and that he's made himself in the form of an arch. He doesn't necessarily have to put his face to the ground. Whereas if Qida is described, and one's face is on the ground, obviously also while on the knees. In the Talmud, there are different types of Qida that are referred to. That's because the word Qida is a general word. But within the context of fulfilling one's halachic obligation, it's specifically with the face on the ground. Istahwaya, prostration. That pishut yodayim u'raglayim. This is the spreading out of one's hands and feet, arms and legs. So istahwaya is when one spreads out his hands and his legs to the extent that he is spread flat with his face on the ground. That is full prostration. The 15th law. When one does nafilat ponim, when one does the act of falling faceward on the ground after prayer, there are those who do the act of qida, simply having their face on the ground, but without spreading all the way out, with the hands and feet spread out. And then there are those who do hishtahwaya, who fully spread out. This very much takes into account the restrictions or limitations that may be on an individual in the setting wherein he's praying. If you have a little room, then of course you can't do hishtahwaya. You can't be spreading out your arms and legs flat on the floor. In that case, you can do qida, simply placing your face on the ground. If there is stone, as further elaborated upon in the laws of idolatry, then instead of placing your face flat on the ground, which is forbidden with stone, one could do a type of kari'ah, like you do in the Shemona Esrei, like all that is required in the Shemona Esrei. And that entails, while he's near the ground, he's not placing his face onto the stone. So that's what I just said. It is because it is forbidden to be fully prostrate on stones, except for in the premises of the temple, as we have clarified in the laws of idolatry. And a distinguished individual, like an esteemed individual of the community, or the prayer leader, who ideally is supposed to be one who is esteemed by the community, he's not to fall upon his face. And this is in the context of prayers of supplication. This is not a broad universal prohibition against an important person prostrating. We see explicitly also throughout Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, that important people definitely did prostrate, even though they may not have regarded themselves as righteous as Joshua, because only one who regards himself, knows himself to be as righteous as Joshua, is permitted to, if he's a esteemed individual, only then is he permitted to bow prostrate on the ground within the context of supplication. Within the context of praise or thanksgiving, it makes no difference. Anyone can do so. So though he may not know himself to be as righteous as Joshua, and therefore should not prostrate with his face to the ground during the context of supplicatory prayers, it's not that he shouldn't do anything at all, but rather he should turn his head a bit while prostrating, and he does not press his face into the ground. And it's permitted for a person to pray in one place, and to fall prostrate in another location. Again, talking about the prostration that immediately follows the standing prayer within the context of supplication. So if you didn't have room to prostrate, or you were embarrassed or would be distracted if you did so in a particular location, you're able to move to another location to do this part of the prayer. In the final law of chapter 5, the 16th law, it is a widespread practice in all of Israel. Note, this is a practice. This is not a practice that is instituted by the Sanhedrin, but this is a practice that all of Israel is simply accustomed to doing. שאין נפילת פנים בשבתות ובמועדות. So the fact that there is no prostrating on Sabbaths and on holy days is simply a widespread practice of the people of Israel. It's not that this is the law, not even necessarily that it's proper. And actually, the son of the Rambam elaborates in his book, The Guide to Serving God, that it's especially proper and fitting to prostrate on the Sabbath and holy days. Only that you don't make supplications while doing so, because they are not days of supplication, but days of joy and rejoicing. But it is the widespread practice that there is no prostration on the Sabbath, nor on the holy days, nor on Rosh Hashanah, nor on new moons, or on Hanukkah or Purim, nor the Minha, nor in the afternoon prayer that are on the eves of the Sabbaths, nor during the nighttime prayer of every day of the week. Later on in the laws of prayer, that Rambam will say that those who make the supplications after the standing prayer at night, that's praiseworthy. And the Rambam writes, though the widespread practice is that one not prostrate at night, there are individuals who do so. And if you go back to the first law of this chapter, you will see that prostrating is one of the 8 things that a person should do during the standing prayer. So to abstain from doing so is a violation of that, even though it's a widespread custom. The Rambam also writes that the widespread custom in Israel is that on the Day of Atonement, but only on the Day of Atonement, do they fall prostrate at each and every prayer. And I think, as far as I'm aware, today even that's not done at the end of the Shmona Esrei. They do this on the Day of Atonement and during the Rambam's time, since the Day of Atonement is a day of supplication, requests, and fasting. That concludes the 5th chapter of the laws of prayer. Any questions, anybody? It's just me, Shaylee, and Boo. Alright. So we will continue to the 6th law. The 6th chapter in the laws of prayer. أسور له لعظام لعبور أحرام بيت الكنائس بشعاع في بور متقلدين. It is forbidden for one to pass behind a synagogue at a time during which the community is praying, unless he had a burden on his shoulders, on his back. Not necessarily on his back, but he's carrying a burden. Or if the synagogue had entrances in both directions. The one who sees him passing behind the synagogue will say to himself that the individual who's passing behind the synagogue is simply going to enter the synagogue from the other side. Likewise, if there is more than one synagogue in the city, then also you need not have concern about walking behind the synagogue when people are praying in it, because the one who sees him will say to himself that the individual who's walking behind the synagogue is simply accustomed to pray in one of the other synagogues. The point here is that one not give the appearance that he has no regard for prayer. That's why the prohibition is not simply that one can't walk behind a synagogue, but that it's prohibited to walk behind a synagogue as to pass it up at a time when this community is praying. Similarly, if he had tefillin, phylacteries on his head, it's permitted for him to pass by. And in such a case, if he has tefillin on his head, he's permitted to walk behind the synagogue to pass it from behind, even if he doesn't fulfill any of the other conditions that were already said. For the tefillin upon his head, they prove or are evidence, give evidence that he is an individual who runs after the commandments, and that he is not among those who disregard prayer. One who prays with the tzibur, with the community, one who's praying with the community should not lengthen his prayer too much. And this is talking about making additions in the prayer, which one is permitted to do, and even good to do so. It's certainly not referring to having the minimum amount of intention that every person should have. You don't have to worry about how in most synagogues people finish relatively quickly, because the unfortunate fact is that this is due in most places not because you may be taking too long, but because the majority of people are praying so quickly that I would have concern as to whether their prayer is even really prayer. As someone who can read Hebrew fairly quickly, I find it very difficult to believe that most of these people are finishing that quickly without skipping anything. But one who is praying by himself, he's permitted to lengthen his prayer to any extent that he wants. Even if one desire to say after his finishing the standing prayer the entire confession of the Day of Atonement, he's permitted to say so. Even if one wanted to add his own words, extra words, into each and every one of the middle blessings of the standing prayer, even into each and every one, according to the context or topic of each of those blessings, Mosif, he's permitted to add. Kesfal, what's implied and how does he do this? So for example, if one had someone sick near to him, then he makes requests for mercy and the blessing of the 19 blessings in the standing prayer, and the blessing regarding the sick. There he should make an addition regarding the individual for whom he has concern, who is sick. And he does so according to the fluidness of his tongue or of his language. If he had need for an income or sustenance, then he should add accordingly in the blessing for the blessing of the years. And in the same manner one can add in each and every one of the middle blessings of the standing prayer. And if one wanted to make any request that he may desire or have need for, he is permitted to do so of any type of request in the blessing, he who hears prayer. But one should not make additional requests neither in the first 3 blessings of the 19 blessings in the standing prayer, nor in the last 3 blessings of the 19 blessings in the standing prayer. It is forbidden for one to taste anything or to do work after the first appearance of dawn light, until one prays the morning prayer. So it's forbidden even to taste or to do work before one prays the morning prayer, from the time of the first appearance of dawn light until the end of the prayer time, up to the point at which one prays, obviously. וכן לא ישכים לפתח חברה לשאור בשלמה. And similarly, one should not rise up early to go to the entrance of his friend's house where his friend dwells and ask how he's doing before he prays the morning prayer. قدم שיתפלל תפילת שחרית ולא יצא לדרך قدم שיתפלל. Nor should one go out on his way before he prays. But one is permitted to taste and to do work before the musaf prayer, the additional prayer that is recited on new moons, at least once every month, and on the biblical holidays. Of course, on biblical holidays you're not supposed to do certain types of actions, but the tasting applies to all equally. And before the afternoon prayer, similarly, so also before the afternoon prayer, one is permitted to taste and to do work before the afternoon prayer. But before the afternoon prayer and before Musaf, one should not have a full meal parallel to the time of Minha. Once the time for Minha Gedolah arrived, one should not enter a bathhouse. Not even in order to sweat. He should not do so until he prays. This is lest he fall asleep, lest he literally faint and end up nullifying the prayer. Similarly, one should not even eat. One should not eat, not even an established meal, not even a non-established meal, not even like a snack, lest he continue in eating. And this is talking about from the time that Minha Gedolah arrived. There's another type of Minha called Minha Qtana. Similarly, from the time that Minha Gedolah arrives, one should not enter into judgment in the context of a court, not even for a full verdict. This is lest the judgment will be contradicted and one will end up having to continue in the adjudication and thereby end up nullifying the prayer. Similarly, one should not sit before a barber before saying the afternoon prayer from the time that Minha Gedolah arrives. Not even should he sit before a regular barber, someone who is not going to be particularly meticulous. Should not do so until after he prays. Lest the pair of scissors break. Nor should one enter into the bursaqi next to the time for Minha until he prays. Lest he see a loss in his dealing and his work and his occupation and become preoccupied in it and be withheld from praying. But if one had already begun in one of these that have been mentioned, whether it's entering into trade or entering into to have his hair cut or a bathhouse, any of these types of things, a meal, if he had already begun one of these, lo yafsik ela gomer, he doesn't have to finish, he doesn't have to stop in the middle of whatever he's doing, but rather he finishes and afterwards he prays the afternoon prayer. From when is the beginning of the tasporah, of the getting a haircut? From the time that one places I'm presuming this means like the cloth or towel that the barber puts over his knees. And from when is the beginning of the bathhouse, of bathing in a bathhouse, apparently? From the time that he removes the clothing which is opposite his skin, so his underclothing. And when is the beginning of the trade? I'm presuming this means trade from the modern Hebrew word. No, I'm not sure if that's the same word. I'm guessing this is trade. Unfortunately, I don't have my commentary with me. Misha Yikshor ben Ktefa Moshe Umanim Kushurin. From the time that one ties between his shoulders, and the manner that the traders, not traitor, but trader, in the manner that they tie. And from when is the time of eating? For those who are of the land of Israel, it is from the time that they wash their hands. And for those of Babylon, the area of Iraq, from the time that they loosen their belts. And when is the beginning of adjudication with regard to all of these laws? From the time that the judges are enshrouded or encloaked, presumably in a talit, and they sit. And if they were sitting, so if they were already sitting, then the time for adjudication is from when the lawyers or attorneys begin their stating their positions. Even though the nighttime standing prayer is voluntary, it is not obligatory, one shouldn't come from his work and say to himself, so one shouldn't come from his work saying that I will eat a bit and drink a bit and I will sleep a small amount and afterwards I will pray, even though the nighttime prayer is only voluntary. Lest he be overcome by sleep and be found to sleep the entire night. Rather, he should say the nighttime prayer, and afterwards he eats and drinks and sleeps, whatever he desires. And it is permitted to get a haircut or to enter a bathhouse before shaharit, before the morning. Why are these permitted, even though it would make sense that it would also be prohibited? Because, as the Rambam is about to say, even if something makes sense within the context of Jewish law, even if it makes sense taking in mind other things that are Jewish law, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's binding, unless the sages specified it. If they didn't specify, then it's not binding, even if it were to make sense. So that's why the Rambam says it's permitted here. Not just that it is exempt if one does so. Not just that one is like at loss for words here. Not just that one is like let off the hook, but rather that it's permitted. Why? Because the sages only decreed with regard to one who does these things near to the time of the afternoon prayer. For this is the thing which was existent, that was the present state. It was the situation that was in existence, actually occurs. And that's also part of the principle of Jewish law, that the sages made rulings with regard to things that are common occurrences. They did not make rulings with regard to things that were extremely exceptional. So for most of the people, they enter, whether the barber or the bathhouse, during the day. But in dawn, but with regard to the morning, doing these things in the morning, a matter that is non-existent, even if it happens occasionally, the sages didn't make any decrees with regard to that matter. I think we will leave it at that, and we will pick up next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, with chapter 8 of with the 8th law of chapter 6 in the laws of prayer. Shalom uvracha. Have a great Shabbat. Shabbat shalom.